Hello, everyone. This is Vern Davis. I am your host of Plant Profits, and Plant Profits is proudly brought to you by Produce Global. I'm really excited today because I have a wonderful guest that's going to talk about something that's extremely important in the world of legal cannabis. My guest today is Mr. Khari Edwards. Khari is head of corporate and social responsibility at Ayr Wellness. Ayr Wellness is a successful multi-state operating cannabis organization and company. And Khari is really, if I could say it, he is the kingmaker, the guy behind the force of good for Ayr Wellness. He allows and makes them appear in places they should be most of the time. And I know that that's a difficult task, but it's a very, very important one in our environment. How you doing today, Khari?
I'm so well blessed and looking forward to this conversation. I'm excited because you guys got me up early, so I'm hyped.
Well, you know, hey, at this time of morning, if you can get hyped, you're doing it. You're doing it, man. You're doing it. But let's talk about this role you have of corporate and social responsibility. I mean, this is a big concern. I mean, Ayr Wellness is a large organization, and we have this patchwork of legalization in cannabis across the country. And let's talk about social responsibility and what your efforts around that and what you're trying to get accomplished for Ayr from a branding perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when you look at the overarching role of corporate and social responsibility, it's really just going into communities and you know, creating relationships and doing right by those communities with obviously your income and your revenue, but also your presence. But with cannabis, it's kind of a little different in the respect that a lot of the communities that we're operating in and also other communities who've been affected by this war on drugs. Right. And so you have almost a two-tier system of really having to put forth the right effort, the right initiatives, the right partnerships, because you have communities of color who have been villainized by this, who are still locked up by this. Right. And then you have communities who are just, you know, part of the cannabis culture, who just want to know that when they go into one of your retail stores or if they're working in your cultivation, that they feel like they're part of the community. And so it's not been a challenging thing, but it has, how do you divert or put your money in two different places at the same time, so to speak, or how do you show up at two different events at the same time for two different communities for different reasons? And so, you know, I find this challenge unique and exciting at the same time. And, you know, shout out to my employers, because the reality of it is they've given me autonomy to do both of those things. And as we to continue to grow and get on shows like yours, that means that we're doing the right thing.
Absolutely.
Now, you know, folks are talking about it. So
absolutely. Absolutely. So when you go out there, are there questions? You're a big company addressing a very important cause and issue and opportunity. Is there a question of authenticity of a big company in the community? And what are you doing it for? Is it about profit, or is it about good, or can you do both at the same time?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about it is, you know, and my background is not in cannabis, right? And, you know,
you got a big public background in local New York.
And so it was kind of deflating in some respects, because, you know, I'm coming in here representing this company. Sure. Not that the company's done anything bad, but the overarching MSO, right? The multi-state operator, the big box. So you go into a place and I'm about to shake a hand and folks are like, I don't want to shake your hand. And I'm like, you know, what did I do to you? And it's like, you know, your company. And I'm like, my company, or is it all companies? And so I think a lot of that work, you have to kind of, you know, destigmatize how big MSOs work.
How do you do that, though? Because that's important what you just said. How do you, because there is a real stigma, you know, in regards to the big company, big money, they don't know our neighborhood, they don't understand us. How do we know that they're serving our good?
And then I'll add something to that before I answer it, right?
Yeah.
Then how do you, somebody like me, African American, Caribbean, coming in, oh, you're token, right? They're using you. You trying to get a check. So the reality of it, the way I look at it is I run all the traps, right? My first introduction is my handshake, right? And then my second is, what do we do for you? How do we partner with you? Then my third is to show up and actually follow through with that partnership. And then after that partnership is done, I follow back up with you. Hey, I want to continue this relationship. And so you start to break down the different walls that people put up of distrust. And so I have to show up. And not that I don't want to show up, but having to show up is the only way you build trust. And then that trust then becomes, oh, well, this guy's not that bad.
Right.
And if this guy's not that bad, he's following up and he's keeping his word. And I'm very honest. Look, if I can't do it, I can't do it. If I can't do it at the number you want me to do, you still want me to be a part of it. And I'm very honest in those respects. And I think that that's the way you kind of move the needle, because your word is all we have, right? In the end, it's our credibility. And I'm, when I leave this role at some point in my life, I want people to turn around and say, that guy was a stand-up guy, and the company that he worked with was stand-up. And so I wasn't great when I started this job, you know what I mean? And so, but there are folks who look at you and say, look, man, these companies did this. And I'll say, did my company do that? Give me that chance. And so I try to separate us from the narrative and then continue to do the work that way.
Yeah, that's great. So you're all, how many markets are you guys in now? I'm trying to keep up.
I'm trying to keep up too. I mean, we're still in 9. Right? So Nevada, Ohio, Illinois, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Florida, New Jersey. We just got into Connecticut. So I think that's 8. So I'm missing something. I'm missing somebody. So whoever I'm missing, I hope I apologize on it.
No, that's okay. That's okay. But the question really is around, as you deploy yourself and your resources and team members through these various markets, what are the differences? Some of the differences in the approach that's necessary, just based on the geography and experiences, and what's the same?
And it's so interesting you asked that, because coming from a public service background and a government background, you figure one size fits all, right? But then when you actually go to Nevada and Pennsylvania and Florida, you start to realize, even though the needs are the same, they're so different in their nuance. And so what we've been, when I got hired, the general, I think the COO at the time said to me, well, how are you going to do this? And I'm like, I'm going to go into the communities. And he's like, what? He's like, you're going to fly into every one of our communities and talk to people? And I'm like, yeah, because if I'm sitting in our office and determining what you need, that's not the case. And so,
was that a real question? Was that a test? Well, I mean, was that a real question?
I really think it was a real question, because when you really look at corporate structure, right? And again, I don't know about everybody else's businesses and even ours, right? We're still building a culture of cannabis, right? Most of these folks that own these companies, if they have good intent or bad intent, they're still coming from what they know best is corporate. And when you're corporate, you don't really walk into rooms, right? That's why they hire folks to do that. So when I said I'm getting on planes to meet folks, it was like, how? Because most CEOs sit in their office. Most COOs sit in the office and they have their tentacles. But again, understanding the culture of this amazing plant, it's a peace pipe, right? It's like you go to a function and folks are passing around, here, try mine. And from a medical background, I'm like, oh, COVID, what's going on, all these things. But in that realm, it's not the case. And so for me, it was just like, I got to travel to all these places, meet these people, understand what their issues are, and then talk to those who are on the ground. And so it became really rewarding, and you do build your brand that way. So that way, they see somebody from the executive office showing up, talking to them. Now it also builds that culture from within, because people care and talk to them. You're not just a bud tender or a clipper. You're somebody that someone cares to have a conversation about. And so it's really been a real a really rewarding process, like working with our head of HR, working with our general managers to be in the mix. And when you say something now, when you talked about Force for Good, most of the people that work for us believe in that concept, right? Because
what does it mean though when you say Force for Good? Because I love that. I love that moniker, but how does the impact show in the markets? You have a diverse group of states that you guys have dropped your business in. So how does it show up? How do I feel you? How do I feel you? Right.
Right. So it shows up by part of what I said, right? So part of the example I give, when I got there, Massachusetts, Florida, and Pennsylvania, I'll use those three markets in particular. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I reached out to the folks. Yeah, there's a few food insecurity issue in Pennsylvania. And I'm like, bet we're going to do a food insecurity, national program. And then Massachusetts was like, no, we have a housing issue. Right. Not that we don't have food insecurity, but our biggest issue is that folks don't have housing.
Right.
And how are we going to address those things? How are we going to go into a community and help be part of the solution? And so that's what Force for Good started to become, like the reality of going in and being part of the solution through our business models, but also through our advocacy and our interaction.
I love that. And I want to pick that back up. We're going to take a quick break, Khari, and we'll come back and we'll pick that back up, because I think that's really important like I said, how do the community feel you and that they start to realize that you are doing good, that Force of Good moniker that we're talking about. I'm Vern Davis. I'm your host of Plant Profits. My guest today is Mr. Khari Edwards. He's the head of corporate and social responsibility at Ayr Wellness. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll see you guys on the other side. Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is Vern Davis. I am your host of Plant Profits, and Plant Profits is proudly brought to you by Produce Global. My guest today is Mr. Khari Edwards, and he is the head of corporate and social responsibility at Ayr Wellness. And we were just talking about, this force of good that Ayr Wellness is trying to put in each of the markets that they are impacting with their brand, and it's very important that they do that. And what Khari was basically saying is that he goes into a market, he finds out what the real issues for that market, and then he tries to put Ayr in the middle of that somehow that can make an impact in their business and with the people, of course, for sure. Did I capture that right, Khari?
Yes. Definitely.
Okay. Yeah. So when you do that, how do you know when it's working?
So, that's a great question, right? Because the return on investment, and you would hope that more people show up at your stores, right?
Yeah.
And so that would be the obvious return on investment. But again, because you're in community, the return on investment is really folks now singing your praises or reaching out to you to say, hey, I heard you worked with so-and-so. This was a great job you did. Or even from a political standpoint, you have elected officials, I'll use, China Tyler in Massachusetts.
Okay.
Like, she reached out and she was like, wow, thank you for showing up here. This has meant so much to us. Okay. And so sometimes it doesn't always turn out to be the same thing in profits.
Yeah.
But what it does do is create that baseline relationship. And, one of the unique things that we do as well is that, I will go in and look for that organization who I know has done the work.
Mm-hmm.
I've done, don't get me wrong. I've met with some organizations that haven't done the work, and then we've partnered with them.
Yeah. And
then those are, again, your validators.
Yeah.
And so now by you working with them and creating a basis, so shout out to Metro Housing in Massachusetts.
There you go.
We work with them, we partner with them. Something as simple as being a sponsor of them for the Boston Marathon. It sounds huge, but the impact, right? The impact of saying, wow, you have a cannabis company who cares about housing and does certain things. then that ripple effect then works. And so, you know, by the response, by the community members, by the government, by the just even your own work is like, wow, people have spoken about this. People see Ayr and they're like, yo, I know that name. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for showing up. You know, and then obviously you do want it to turn into a brand loyalty thing where folks come and shop in your stores. You know, but the immediate return on investment is the word of mouth, that people know that you've been there. They call on you. You know, you get invited to great shows like this.
No, that is true. But so look, cannabis is going through an interesting time, but one that's very predictable. This industry should be doing what it's doing at the moment, but it's difficult. It's difficult. Money's tight everywhere, touching the industry, and corporate social responsibility, CSR, is one of the programs you would anticipate in corporate America would be one of those programs, if you want to call it a program, because programs, it's easy to call something a program when it may not be constant. So, right? So it may be one of those things that may be cut. Things are tight. We're not getting that ROI, and ROI, when things are tight, goes to dollars and cents. It doesn't go to the force of good, you know, and I understand how that works. So tell me how you're dealing with that.
So I'm trying to think of a great analogy, right? So I've been great at dodging bullets, right? Not like Superman catching them in the teeth. My prior history is, I worked for an amazing hospital in Brooklyn. But it was a safety net hospital, right? And safety net hospitals don't get the commercial pay, they get more of the Medicaid pay. And so I literally worked for 10 years with our hospital having $150 to $200 million deficit annually. And so I ran 3 departments there. And so I had to learn how to make the most of nothing. Right. I mean, the budgets that I had now, if you looked at me at the hospital, you'd have thought that I was like running one of the biggest health systems in the world. And so it's a lot of creativity, because you're right. We are an expense versus income. And we've been cut. I've been asked to cut my budget significantly, but not the things that have been impactfully important. And so that's the key point of it, is that there's an intention of really doing good from our company. And so, if they turn around and say I had $100,000 budget and they're like, I need you to cut it by 40%. I'm like, okay, I'll start cutting. And then my CEO and chairman be like, no, we're not cutting the expungements. Right. We're not cutting the smaller or more significant district community events. What we're doing is we're going to reduce it, right? How do we then now partner with someone else so that we're not taking the whole brunt of it? How do we now bring in folks who may have been against cannabis, but how do we bring in a church? How do we bring in folks to understand what the mission is, and understanding that these conversations are being had ahead of time with an anticipation. And like I said, I presented a budget to my to my CEO. He accepted the budget. He called me twice and was like, hey, we got to move the budget. And I'm like, fine. And he's like, fine. And I'm like, yeah, because based off of our conversation, I know what happens for us in terms of our expungement events, our changing legacies. Shout out to my t-shirt. Right.
I love it.
Changing legacies. Impact so many people, right? Because the reality of it is as we move people from incarceration and denial to jobs and opportunity, that brings up money. And they do remember Ayr, right? We're doing something for Juneteenth in New Jersey with Mayor Barack, Ras Barack. And I'm a huge fan. And like, what is that going to do for us in New Jersey? People are going to be like, wow, you was with the mayor at some point. When I get my money, I'm coming to shop with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the intent of what we're doing is really a part of that. The conversations, communication is huge in every relationship, and I give kudos to my CEO, David Gobert, and my chairman, John Singelman, because of understanding what our purpose is. We know the money is going to come, and there's a patience that we have that most people don't have, but we also do things in very strategic ways that we're not spending $2-3 million in community because we've done it when we had money, and now we make those relationships.
Absolutely, yeah. That's wonderful, and to do what you do. The conversations and the relationships that you have internally at the C-level of your organization is what's going to make or break the situation in the system, man. And that's a tribute. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back. And guess what? We're going to dive into New York when we get back, Khari. We got to talk about the city, baby. We're hometown. All right. Hey, I'm Vern Davis. I'm your host of Plant Profits, and Plant Profits is brought to you by Produce Global. Khari Edwards, head of corporate and social responsibility of Ayr Wellness, is my guest, and we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to go to New York City when I get back. Okay. Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is Vern Davis. I'm your host of Plant Profits, and Plant Profits is brought to you by Produce Global. And my guest today is Mr. Khari Edwards, and Khari is the head of corporate and social responsibility for Ayr Wellness, a multi-state operator doing business, I think, in 9 geographies around the country. And we're going to talk about New York because New York has been quite an interesting ride. So let's talk. I mean, it started out with this amazing idea of putting social responsibility and the ownership of dispensaries and businesses, and it's been hard because, quite frankly, there's just and look, I'm going to say it. It's just a failure of enforcement of the illegal element out there that won't allow the legal element to thrive and survive and to grow and to execute on that mission that was, prepared for legal cannabis in New York. So talk to me about that and how you're impacting that fact.
Well, so look, there are. I mean, you said so many correct things.
I'm glad
in that.
Well,
look,
I wish they weren't.
New York is home base for me, right?
Yeah.
When I started this job, they were like, "Do I want to come to Florida?" I'm like, "I'm never going to leave my hood." And my hood is New York. And the thing about New York that folks outside of New York don't realize is that we are uniquely positioned because everybody looks to us, but we look to everybody else first, right? Because, whether it's casinos, whether it's like all of these social justice things, people like, New York, how New York goes, the rest of the country goes.
Right.
And so that burden of proof is something that we pay attention to. So when the MRTA was written, it was written with the specific understanding of trying to make sure those impacted on the war on drugs were no longer villainized for the things that they've done, right? If you pay attention to New York's history, stop and frisk, broken window policies, when there were just an attack on Black and brown people, right? And in New York, it's sad. Like I grew up in that hood without, I got stopped for a million reasons, and none of them made sense, right? I basically had my pockets, picked, everything going on because how have I looked? Rockefeller drug laws, all of these things started. And so, it seems crazy what's going on from a business standpoint, but the rationale of it is that we also hustlers, right? And so our underground market is probably 10 times more sophisticated than the California market. Yeah. When people don't get access to things, they find a way to make it work for them. And now as we see this proliferation of these illegal shops and these smoke shops, and bodegas are now turning into smoke shops and fire G's, we have to be really conscious of how do we go about that enforcement, because if not, and this is one thing that people aren't talking about, and I give OCM a lot of credit, if we go and enforce these folks and start rearresting, right, then what's the precedent that we're sending? And so
how do you deal with that? That is a tough spot. I mean,
it's a tough spot.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at it from a return on investment. The state is going to anticipate almost $6 billion in revenue from legal cannabis, right? Over once all of these shops open up, everything's going to be great. You imagine what that does for education and healthcare
Right.
to have like an influx of money.
Yeah.
But if you go back to our history, right, think about how we dealt with the cigarette issue. Like we used to have cigarettes coming in, illegal cigarettes,
Right.
not stamped, everything from having them in Indian reservations to folks just selling illegal stuff. And again, when we start to get ourselves out of problems by arresting and rearresting, then that changes the fabric and the culture. So while there are two sides of folks, the big businesses like ours are like, yo, this is killing the industry, or even small businesses, I really appreciate the level of intention that they're going by. So now that the governor signed in the law and the city signed in the law, you're going to see the enforcement in real ways, but still not arresting folks, because I don't know who necessarily owns these smoke shops, but I know who works in these smoke shops.
I understand.
And so if you're going after those who are well funded in terms of like the folks, the landlords and all these other things, you're going to start to see hitting them where they are. But the minute we put handcuffs on someone,
that's working in the shop, that reflects what the people that you're trying to approach in a very positive way with the plant, that becomes a very negative narrative.
Yeah, and so don't get me wrong, it's frustrating seeing these spots open across from schools.
Yeah.
Right, the community hates it, and so it puts a more of a negative spin on cannabis. And we have to double our efforts in education and everything, so that people aren't like, they sold some bad weed to my kid, or when I was in the hospital system, the K2 stuff was creating like real issues, real mental health issues. But again, through all this tragedy is opportunity. And so I think there is a responsibility from our legislators and our government and even companies like mine, we're not in New York yet, that we start to create the education and become more partner centric. But it's a difficult balance, man. You can't arrest your way out of it, because then you can have other folks in jail for what? Like, take their businesses from them, like find them, but don't put them in jail. And there was that nuance that they couldn't figure out until recently.
Yeah, man, it is tough. And I'm really, really happy that you came here today. And I really we got to it last, but I really wanted to get to the New York thing, because it's not as simple. If it was simple and non-caring scenario and not well thought out, I'm sure that those shops would just automatically get closed down, and people would get arrested, and the problems would probably be larger than they are. And but it's hard, though. I mean, everybody makes an investment. Ayr is making and has made a huge investment to be there and have a presence, and that presence is being delayed, and it's hard. If if you're running a business, that's a hard pill to swallow.
I mean, that's why the folks that elected, the folks that sit in the LCM, I give them credit. I've worked with a bunch of folks for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And it's hard, man. It's hard making decisions that affect community in certain ways. And then, if you're from New York and your bodega is still a bodega in a deli, and you go in there, you see these are family folks that are working there. You see that there are generations, there's a 14-year-old, 15-year-old behind the register trying to do the things, but then there are folks who take advantage of that. And then how do you decipher that? And it takes a lot. And I'm excited to see how the enforcement goes. I think that they got it right in the way that they're going to roll it out. But if I saw a kid coming out of and it's going to be a kid, right, or 18-year-old kid in handcuffs because they were selling, cannabis from California, Oklahoma. Yeah, I'm like, wow, this industry's not the place I want to be. And so it took a very interesting balance, and it has delayed. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's frustrating.
It's
every
painful.
time you go on the OCM board member, they're talking about the rollout, and you're like, we're not there yet. But you also have things like lawsuits. So it's gonna get there.
Yeah, it will, man. You got a hard job to keep people in that corporate building, man, calm about it. I understand that. I clearly understand it, man. It was so great, first of all, to meet you, Khari. I really appreciate you showing up here at Plant Profits, and you have a very difficult, important, but when it works, it's got to feel really great to you, and because you're making a positive impact on communities that you know very well what's happening there. So I really
will tell you something. It's probably one of the most rewarding jobs I've had.
Yeah.
Literally going into communities and watching your efforts really change people's lives. I couldn't even tell you that.
I love it. Changing people's lives. I definitely love that. This is Vern Davis. I'm your host of Plant Profits, and my guest today on the show was Mr. Khari Edwards. He's the head of corporate and social responsibility at multi-state operator Ayr Wellness, and he's doing an amazing job in a very difficult situation. So I want to thank all of you for joining us here at Plant Profits, and you can download this episode and all episodes of Plant Profits by going to cannabisradio.com, our partner in this, or subscribe to the show on all major podcast outlets and platforms, including Apple, Amazon, Google, everywhere. We are there. Spotify, you can get us at iHeart, anywhere. Plant Profits, you can find us. Please plug in, download. We appreciate it. And really, I want you to also know about Produce Global, my company. And you can find us on all social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, all of them. We are there. And really take a look at us and really see how we are building companies and what we do and how we're changing people's lives at Produce Global. And that's PROTIS global.com. This is Vern Davis, your host of Plant Profits. Until next time, cheers.